So this really isn't like a news episode per se. First, I should say welcome. I'm Harrison. That's Josh. Welcome to the Awkward Sports Podcast. This isn't a news discussion one. We decided to have some fun with this episode. So this week, another Tampa Bay team, the Lightning, had a quarter century team released by the NHL. I'm gonna have a story on that on the Hockey Writers. You should definitely check that out when it's published. But for Awkward Sports, we decided to have some fun with it and do a Tampa Bay Buccaneers version of for a quarter century team. I almost said like an all century. I'm like, we got
I
75
mean,
more years left for that one.
up to this point, yeah. Up to this point, it would still be right, but yeah, you would be omitting the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we're around in 2100 to do an all century team
We're
for
doing it.
the Bucks, that we will hop on that podcast, whatever old folks home we're in, and we'll have a great time with that.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to do this based on offense and defense, obviously, both sides of the ball. Um, we settled on, quarterback, throw out a running back or two, have three wide receivers, a tight end, throw out your best O lineman, and then for defense, put out your top three or four defensive end slash tackles, your top three or four linebackers, two safeties, two cornerbacks, the whole deal. Just set the criteria there. They had to have been a significant member of the Bucks in the 2000s, from 2000 to 2025. We didn't really set a criteria for how much they had to necessarily play in length. It's just their significance to the team.
Yeah, and we're very clearly just wanted to put out there the only real hard set rule we had when we
Yes,
came
that
up with
too.
the list was we are omitting Brady and Gronk from the list because those are
Correct.
cheat code players that are by default some of the best we've ever had in Bucks history. For those of you out there wondering why on earth did you compile an all-time team without two key members of a Super Bowl winning team? Um,
We
that
wanted
is
a challenge.
we wanted to challenge ourselves a little bit. So we didn't necessarily go all players drafted by the Buccaneers, but maybe more so players that you could make a case that were either primarily Buccaneers throughout their career, or you could make the argument that they're more so a Buccaneer than they were for a player as another team.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to have it described. So, Josh, how about you lead off the offensive side of things?
All right, Harrison. So we'll start with the offensive line. I think we can hop back and forth here. I'll do my offensive line. I'll let you do yours. So to get the big fellas first and foremost out of the way, I mean the first one is center Ryan Jensen. Now, obviously, he had his stint with the Baltimore Ravens. He's been on a number of teams throughout his career. Um, Obviously, a big factor and a big part of that Super Bowl run that the Bucs had in 2020. I think that was the pinnacle of his career as an NFL player, him being on that team and anchoring the line, being that enforcer up front for players like Tom Brady and the other stars around him. That guy that, like, if he saw anybody on that team being messed with, he was going to be the big brother, stand up and backed it up more so not only with his words, one of the best trash talkers in the game, but with his play as well at center. You go to the guards. I think you have two solid candidates here. Ali Marpet, shorter stint for his career, but he had, like, at guard, maybe not a long career, but a very solid one for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A couple of Pro Bowls. He made obviously, again, another big piece on that Super Bowl run. And then Davin Joseph, who wasn't on either Super Bowl team, but a very strong guard for the Bucs between the mid 2000s into the early 2010s. Had a nice stint there with Tampa when a lot of things weren't necessarily going the Buccaneers' way. He was one of the few players that stood out from those runs. And you plug him on either of those teams that were contending, or even on teams that came up just short, like the one in 2021. I think he makes a big difference on that offensive line as well. So Davin Joseph is my other guard. Tackles, I mean, this one, I mean, is pretty self-explanatory. Tristan Wirfs being the first player in NFL history to be named first team All-Pro, both as a left tackle and as a right tackle. He's definitely one of my tackles for the quarter century team, followed by Donald Penn, who was one of the bigger anchors in the Josh Freeman era, who has spent a nice little stint with the Buccaneers as well.
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, I pretty much had the exact same O-line as you. I think it might just because we kind of discussed our list a little bit beforehand, but also I don't really know who else you'd put in there. You have the
Right.
Super Bowl winners. Joseph was a two-time Pro Bowler, was part of that '07 team that made the playoffs before the really long droughts. And Penn, same thing, made a Pro Bowl with the team, was there for a good chunk of time, about what, 6 or 7 years maybe? Longer than most players are on this team. Like that kind of almost qualifies you as one of these guys. All right, besides the O line, who do you got?
I'll be honest. So we get to that. We get to the explosive players, the fun players we'd like to go. I like to go to. So, we'll start at tight end. I mean, obviously, you can make a case for a guy like Cameron Brate. I think he's got a compelling case. I think for me, I think Kellen Winslow Jr. slightly gets the nod. I think he was an electric playmaker for the Bucs. Obviously, not a long time tenured Buccaneer, out of the University of Miami, but he was somebody that was more of a versatile playmaker, is not just like a true tight end. You know, you could kind of spread him out and he could be a vertical threat as well. Again, on many teams that didn't really boast a lot of star power, he was often a go-to target. Not definitely not a definitely not a low profile figure. He was somebody who was always outspoken and somebody who was a he talked as loud as he played. But definitely an entertaining watch for sure at tight end. I mean, you look at the running backs. I think this one fullback is all star. That's not debatable. A train, you give him the ball all day. A transcendent fullback, not just somebody who's on this Buccaneers all time team, but somebody who was not only just a fullback, but somebody that was just an anchor behind that offensive line that you could use more than just blocking in the passing game. Somebody who played halfback every once in a while, and he was just one of the toughest players in NFL history to bring down. I mean, you look at what he was able to accomplish. Obviously, a Super Bowl champion in his own right, and if it weren't for injuries, who knows if he played a little bit longer. Somebody who might have been a borderline Hall of Fame type player for a fullback. We haven't seen too many at that position like Mike Allstott. Um, you look at the running back, a true halfback position. I think you could. I think for me, the leader in the clubhouse there is Doug Martin for what he was able to do out of Boise State. That rookie season that he had, a sensational one. He had the 3 touchdowns against Minnesota, followed by a 5 touchdown performance the very next week against the Raiders. Was one of the more impressive stretches we've seen from a running back, not just for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but in NFL history. Honorable mention goes to LeGarrette Blount. He was a tough runner, but he just played for a number of different teams and had a number of signature moments on every team really but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He did have a few Marshawn Lynch type runs with the Bucs, but had some more success down the line with teams like the Patriots and the Philadelphia Eagles in his own right. And um, quarterback, you look at. I mean, you could talk about Jameis Winston being a candidate outside of Tom Brady. For me, honestly, early on already, I mean, I think you can already give it to Baker Mayfield for what he's been able to do in his first 2 years. Played with the Browns, played with the Panthers, didn't have much success with the Panthers, played with the Rams, didn't really have much success there outside of a late game comeback that he had with the Rams. But 2 seasons of more than 40 plus touchdown passes, been dynamic with his legs. I think you have a compelling case to already make Baker Mayfield that guy on the quarter century team, with the way he has been performing, going through multiple OCs in his first 2 years with the Buccaneers, first being Dave Canales and secondly being Liam Cohen.
Yeah. And I think honestly there's a really good case for Baker. When you think about just quarterbacks in Bucks history, how many guys make it more than 2 or 3 years? I think the only answer might be Jameis. And I don't think anyone wants to put Jameis at the top of this list. I know there's going to be some people who hate that I say that. They can come after me in the comments. I don't care. 30 for 30. I
30 for
mean,
30.
after that too, it's like if we're not doing Brady, you're not going to give it to Josh Freeman. Who
No.
else is there? Josh McCown, Mike Glennon.
You
I
just
mean, I guess in,
Magic. Fitzmagic, that stint, but it just wasn't long enough.
No, I mean, I guess you could go with Brad Johnson too, because he did win a Super Bowl, but he's not the reason they won. Like the offensive piece was all Stott.
Jeff Garcia, there's just a number of different journeyman QBs that have
Oh
been a
man,
part
Jeff
of it.
Garcia, that just brings back that childhood nostalgia from that '07 team.
Yeah. And now, I mean, now to my favorite part of the entire list is the wide receiver room. That's like one that's not only like an all Buccaneers team, but some of these receivers can stack up amongst the best in the league.
And by the
You
way,
start.
mine's identical to his, so we're just gonna go in this one in tandem.
Yeah. I'm gonna build up to the. I mean, Vincent Jackson is somebody that's on this list. Vincent Jackson being a San Diego Charger had some success there, but then coming over to Tampa and being really a leader like off the field as much as he was on the field, and a big time mentor for a guy like Mike Evans, who is undisputedly on this list, the probably the best, not only for me, like not only to me, is the best offensive player this team has ever had. I've made the case before that he's the best draft pick this team has ever had and has ever made. And then you have a guy like Chris Godwin, dynamic, electric. The only thing with him is health, really. And when he's on the field, he is a dynamic playmaker. So the Buccaneers receiving room is definitely the strongest out of all the positions when you go through the history books, especially since the year 2000. Even guys like Joey Galloway, Mike Williams, Keyshawn Johnson, and Keenan McCardell were all solid players that just couldn't make the cut on this list because of those three exceptional wide receivers that came through the Tampa Bay area and played for the Buccaneers.
Yeah, I mean, with Mike Evans, he is the greatest offensive player in team history. I don't know if I can necessarily say he is the best player in history. It's really difficult to say he stands above Derek Brooks or Rondé Barber. But when it comes to offense, there's no doubt. It's him, it's all Stott, everybody else follows. Jackson, rest in peace. He was never a Hall of Famer. Maybe it'd be cool if he was Ring of Honor, even though he's probably not at that caliber. But at the same time, he was beloved in Tampa Bay for many years. And Chris Godwin. I mean, who else rounds out the top three? Some people think there are people in certain camps that thought they should prioritize Godwin over Mike Evans long term. He's a bit younger, equally effective. Obviously, not around for a good chunk of last season because he was hurt. But they've been a tandem since 2017. They've been one of the top wide receiver duos in the NFL for almost a decade now. That's impressive. How often do you have two guys who are of that high a caliber for that many years?
Yeah, we haven't seen it for that many years. We saw it obviously. The Minnesota Vikings in the late '90s had Carter and Randy Moss, but Randy Moss wasn't in Minnesota for very long before he continued his career with the Raiders and then the Patriots after that, making his rounds around the NFL. So yeah, definitely one of the more special tandems in on for the Buccaneers in the last 25 years, but also in NFL history. You don't see it very often, especially for the longevity. So definitely on the offensive side. I let off the offense, Harrison. You start us off on the side that Bucs fans can flex a little bit
Oh,
strong.
hold up. I
If
still
you
got my other offensive picks. I didn't do all of them.
oh, oh that's right, because you
Like I
said
have a couple differing ones that I
that's right.
wanted to discuss.
That's right. You said
For,
because you said same O line, same receivers. I'm fast. I think. Did you agree with me on
I agree
quarterback?
with you on quarterback. I
Okay,
mean, like, we
so
discussed other potential options, but like if we're not going with Jameis or Brady, it's by default Baker Mayfield.
right, yeah, I agree with that. So receivers we agree, quarterback we agree, offensive line we agree. So tight end, fullback we agree. So tight end, running back. Who do you
Yeah.
have?
So I actually do agree with Allstott and Martin, but I wanted to just go a little deeper in some of the options you didn't throw out there. I heard no love for Cadillac Williams and no
Darnell.
love for Michael Pittman.
Yeah, no, I mean
I
that's
just had to make sure those two got some love, even if they were still runner-ups for me personally.
yeah. No, I mean Carnell Williams, obviously out of Auburn. He had a really good stint. I think that was honestly quite like most Bucks fans obviously remember his run. That was after he was there, that's when like Martin took over, and I think Martin's like like explosiveness, bursting into the league the way he did, kind of made people outside of the organization not really think about Carnell Williams as much, but he was definitely a cog there before. Even a guy that had a tail end of his stint with Tampa, Warwick Dunn. I know he had more of his dominant years.
Yeah, I
Uh,
would say Warwick Dunn's a 90s player for sure. When it comes to Bucks history, 2000s, he's a Falcons guy. That's
exactly.
the reason why I think neither of us brought him up. Like he
Right.
didn't stick around long enough to even be part of the Super Bowl team. That was when Pittman showed up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that you can make a compelling case for both those guys. Obviously, solid running backs in their own right for the Buccaneers as well.
Yeah, so want to make sure they got some love. I had a different tight end answer. It's not going to be a popular one, but I have to give credit to longevity and like where he ranks all time in stats. I went with Cameron Brate. Even though by the end he was dropping a lot of passes, in the end he's second all time in touchdown catches for tight ends. He has 33. If you do the 2000s, he has the most. I believe he has the most receiving yards in this century for a Bucks tight end as well. So in the end, a 9-year career with them, he is statistically the best Bucks tight end. He wasn't the most exciting, even those 1 or 2 years OJ Howard was good. You can argue he was more exciting than Brates, but in the end, he's a guy who just got it done. And he was around
Yeah,
for a long time. He was a Bucks mainstay. I have to give him that credit.
I respect it. I mean, for me, he was a close second, but I think there's obviously a case to be made. Obviously, one of Jameis's favorite targets. He had a lot of touchdowns in that era with Jameis Winston, and obviously when Dirk Cutter was the head coach, Dirk Cutter emphasized the usage of tight ends, and Cameron Brate was one of the players that thrived in that system. As much as we bag on the system as a whole, Cameron Brate was one of those players that succeeded in that offense.
Yeah, and of course we all forgot the true goat, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Adam Humphries. I'm kidding. Uh,
Scotty Miller,
Scotty
speedy.
Miller. I thought about saying Scotty Miller too, but I chose to go with the deeper cut.
And he makes one of the all-time plays at least. He's got that one of the all-time one of the greatest plays in Buccaneer history. Scotty
Yes, yes,
Miller.
he does. So you want me to lead off defense? Let's do that. All right. So for defensive end slash defensive tackles, that's gonna piss some people off. I kind of just grouped them together. They're that first part of the front seven. I went with four each because sometimes there's a 4-3 defense, a 3-4. I didn't want it to be where someone got cut because of
Or,
just how you might just happen to choose how to run your defense. For defensive end slash defensive tackle, Warren Sapp, easy. I know he spent a good chunk of the 21st century with the Raiders, but he still is an All-Pro multiple times in the 2000s. He was part of that Super Bowl. Always going to be associated with the Bucs in the early 2000s, no matter how many years he was in Oakland. Vita Vea, we all love some Vita Vea. I'm going with also Gerald McCoy. He was here for a good like 7, 8 years. He rode out some very, very rough Bucs seasons and only did not stick around for one final year. And he still reps the Bucs to this day online on social media. Go look him up every game. He is hyping up Bucs fans, keeping people to stay with it. He is 100% a member of this quarter century team. And of course, Simeon Rice.
yeah, I
I felt that
think
was
that,
I felt that was an easy one for me just because of the Super Bowl years. I don't know about you.
yeah. So you had Warren Sapp, Gerald McCoy, Simeon Rice,
Vita
Zach,
Vea.
and Vita Vea. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Vita Vea is an honorable mention for me. But I also did it a little bit differently. I did two like defensive tackles and two edge rushers, which is why I didn't put Vita Vea. But if I was doing it your way, I would have put Vita Vea as well. Um, the way I had it, I completely agree. I had Gerald McCoy, Warren Sapp, and when I went edge, I still was stuck with Simeon Rice, and then the other one was Shaq Barrett for the way he was able to dominate off the edge. But yes, if we were going just four defensive linemen, regardless of position, I would put Vita Vea as well. But I think even all of those guys have a case. So my one difference on this team is Shaq Barrett, especially coming in as a player that was a buy low type of player who had a double digit sack season, um, someone that was beloved in Tampa Bay as well, and is now returned to Tampa Bay. Came out of retirement to come back to play with the Buccaneers to see if he can continue to build on his legacy in the pewter and red. So You look at that defensive line, regardless of how you mix and match it, there is depth. I mean, the Bucs have a history of fantastic defensive front players.
Yeah, and also I didn't honorable mention to William Goldston just because like he's been around for so long. So
He
just
has been
the
longevity.
longevity by default gets him
He's
at minimum an honorable mention.
he's like Udonis Haslam, but he's like, oh yeah, he's still there. Like he's
Yeah,
gonna be in the
that's
locker
a
room.
great comparison, by the way. He's
He's a
still
locker room.
there.
He's a
He's
locker
just
room
not
guy.
retiring. He's still there. Is he doing much? No,
So
he's still there though.
he's just around in the locker room being that mentor to all the younger players. So I respect that honorable mention as well.
Yeah, for linebackers, Derek Brooks, Levante David. I accidentally slid Shaq Barrett into that position because
Hey, it works for you.
outside
Because
linebacker was what he was listed as. So when I was double checking his position, that's what I rolled with. I mean, in the end, Barrett is sixth all time in sacks on this team. He's absolutely part of this. So all right. So while we're still on the front seven, who do you got?
Derek Brooks, Levante David were my first two because I shifted Barrett to the front. And Vita Vea was my honorable mention. My other linebacker of choice actually was Devin White. I know a lot of Bucs fans will be like, "Wait, timeout, Devin White."
I thought about
Well,
Devin White.
second team All Pro on the year that they made the Super Bowl run, a monumental piece to that team, a top 10 NFL draft pick for a reason. He had a stellar start to his career. Obviously, the fall from grace, obviously not what many people saw coming, but in the reality is what happened. But he's still part of one of the all-time greatest Buccaneer rosters and a key cog to a big-time Super Bowl run that had key plays in it as well. When he had that pick six against the New Orleans Saints in the divisional round, you kind of had flashes of Derek Brooks in the Super Bowl. Devin White was a player, obviously not for very long at the top of his game, but somebody that was a key cog to that defense. And you could make the argument that Tampa may not get there or win without him. You saw the game against the Commanders. Devin White was absent in that playoff game. At the time, it was the football team, rather. He was absent from that game because he was on the COVID list. And unironically, that was one of the more competitive playoff games the Bucs had to play. So they missed his presence in that game. When he came back, it made a monumental difference down the stretch of that season.
Absolutely. Sometimes we just love to give Devin White hate. I'm part of that bandwagon, but he really was for those 2 or 3 years an absolute force on that defense. So getting into the backfield, I get John Lynch at safety along with Antoine Winfield Jr. I think that's the consensus here. You have the Hall of Famer from the 2002 Super Bowl, Super Bowl 37, and then you have the current All-Pro, arguably future Hall of Famer from the Super Bowl 54 team. That's
Yep.
plain and
First
simple.
of all, as
Done.
well, yeah. Completely agree. Yeah,
Yep.
those are my two safeties as well. Um, I did want to throw out an honorable mention out there, linebacker again. This was another player that went short stint. Quan Alexander, I think, had a nice
Oh, how did I forget Quan Alexander? I feel bad now.
another LSU linebacker. Just like Devin White was. Quan Alexander had the big game, obviously after the one in the against the Falcons. He had was known as the Quan Alexander game. A couple, I think, fumble recoveries, a pick six. He had one that was called back and then did it again. It was a spectacle to behold. But that was an honorable mention on defense I wanted to throw out there. But in terms of the back end, like Antoine Winfield Jr. and John Lynch are my two safeties as well. I mean, there's no argument there.
No. And I think there's no argument for cornerback either with Rondé Barber.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I thought you were about to say two, and I'm like, I don't know. Our second one might be different from each other, but the
No, our
first
sec
one,
honestly, I really don't have a second one. I wanted to leave that one up open to discussion
okay,
because
I want to hear you out.
once you get past Barber, there are a few guys that could definitely get the pick. I mean, like
Vernon Hargraves.
Jamal Dean,
Oh God.
absolutely not. I have my opinions on Jamal Dean. Very few of them are friendly. I was I was thinking maybe Brian Kelly or Aqib Talib.
That's so funny that you bring both of those players up because those were the players that the one that I went with was Aqib Talib. Now more known for other
Right.
franchises
But we're talking about
outside
for
of
the
the
Bucks. That's why I picked him.
but he was drafted by the Buccaneers. So there's that, and he had a solid start to his career in Tampa. I gave the nod to Aqib Talib just slightly, but I think the people that go with Brian Kelly, I'm not going to dispute that. He was
No.
obviously part of the Super Bowl team in 2002, playing opposite of Rondé Barber. That was a really solid cornerback tandem as well. So I think you could go either one. For me, I gave the nod to Aqib Talib with Brian Kelly being the honorable mention. No, not the LSU head coach slash Notre Dame former head coach Brian Kelly, the cornerback Brian Kelly.
No, and generationally, like when I hear Brian Kelly, I automatically think of the guy who lost to the Florida Gators this year, as opposed to my older millennial family members who probably think of the Bucs cornerback.
Yeah. Either way, you got a solid one there. And again, just shows the depth of Tampa's defense. Like, you could put Tampa's defense like that. Like, obviously, offense, you're cobbling together players, and you have some really strong ones, and you have some maybe ones from other teams. But when it comes to the defense, you can stack an all-time Buccaneers defense.
Oh yeah,
Forget quarter
you do a
century.
first team and a second team, no problem.
Forget quarter century for a second. You could actually, I think you could put together, if you put like an all-time Buccaneers defense, 11 players out there, that I don't think there is a franchise in the NFL that if you took an all defense from any other franchise, I don't know if you can cobble together a better starting 11 than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers throughout their history.
Well,
Because
no,
then
because
you're
then you can
putting
throw
Sullivan
in
on the
Leroy
edge
Selman too.
on the edge, which is people said he was Reggie White before Reggie White.
I would agree. And plus, then you could throw in Leroy Selman,
Yeah,
arguably still a top five Tampa Bay Buccaneer all time.
throw him in there. I mean, the list goes on. You can just continue to stack up
Yeah.
years and years of defense.
And I just want to give this one cornerback a shout out. He does not deserve to be on this list. Never in a million years. But because he was on the Super Bowl team in 2020, he'll always remain one of my favorites. You got sick of me mentioning him in 2020.
SMB.
SMB, give me Sean Murphy Bunting. I will love that man forever.
Here's here's my take on Sean Murphy. I remember when the Bucs drafted him second round out of I think Central Michigan, I believe it was, and I was like, what? I was like, okay. He actually impressed. He had stints. There were obviously down stretches with him, but hey, he made some key plays. Like Dwight Smith in the Super Bowl had those two pick sixes, right? Like Sean Murphy Bunting had those key plays in the playoffs as well. And you can't ever take that away from him. So when it comes to highlight plays, you can put Sean Murphy Bunting up there with like the Scotty Millers and some of those other, unsung heroes, if you will, from some of these Tampa Bay runs.
That's the best way to put it. Would he ever be on this list? No. And you would be questioning my sanity if I put him in there. But because of the key plays at the right time, I gotta make sure he gets some love here. But that'll do it for this episode of the Awkward Sports Podcast, your quarter century team for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Gators next.
Gators next? Someone say Gators are next? Yeah, of course the Gators are next. Who else would we do next? We literally talk about two things on this podcast these days: Gator football and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So of course they're next. No offense to Gator basketball. I was just making a joke. We'll keep we will see you next time, guys. I'm Harrison. That's Josh. This is the Awkward Sports Podcast.